who are you? What do you do? What are these books you're doing?
My name is Larisa Garski. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. And I practice in Chicago, Illinois, where I'm also a clinical director at a psychotherapy practice known as Empowered Therapy. And I am here today with my fabulous co-writer, Justine Mastine, and we're going to talk about our first book. We've written a number of chapters, but this is our first full book that we have written together, and it's called Starship Therapise, Using Therapeutic Fanfiction to Rewrite Your Life.
Hi, I'm Justine Mastine. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a licensed alcohol and drug counselor, and a yoga teacher, of all things. As Larisa said, we are here talking about our upcoming book, and I'm happy to see other humans.
It's so nice to see all of you. Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Janina Scarlet. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. And I specialize in incorporating pop culture into therapy, much like my amazing colleagues here. And the upcoming book that I have is called Super Survivors, and it is to help folks who are struggling with the trauma of the ongoing pandemic. The book features fictionalized heroes who are going through a difficult time dealing with trauma and anxiety during the ongoing pandemic, as well as superhero-like self-help skills to help folks deal with some of these challenges, both during as well as after the pandemic is over.
So these books that you're writing, in one way or another, you're using fiction, fantastic fiction, to help people grow, therapize, self-help. What are they doing? Let's start with the one that's coming out first. That would be Janina's.
Sure. So this book is actually a little bit more like a traditional self-help book, but with a lot of fictional kind of examples. So there are exercises to teach folks how to understand their trauma from the point of view of an origin story, kind of like how Superman has an origin story, and as does the Hulk. And so helping individuals to understand that whether their trauma history started during the pandemic or perhaps with 9/11 or another traumatizing event, that our origin story doesn't have to define us. It is a jumping off point from which we can develop into the kind of hero that we want to be. And so the book uses lots of fictionalized examples from traditional superheroes, from DC, from Marvel, but also from other characters, from shows like Supernatural, from movies and books like Harry Potter, to help folks learn certain skills for managing some of these challenges.
Starship Therapise is based off of our podcast that we've been doing for a couple of years. And the sort of the basis of the podcast is we have a little bit of an ongoing radio play where I am Kirk and Larisa is Spock, and we are on the Starship Therapise. And each episode we talk about a different self-help or psychology topic, and we use fandom as a way for folks to explore that idea. So, you know, we talked about grief, and we used, of course, the Batman to talk about grief. And so in the book, we've kind of stepped out of our personae and are now firmly in our actual selves, talking about how fandom and what we call fandom attachments, for psych geeks, you will know that as parasocial attachments, how those help us make sense of our lives, and how our fandom stories help us make sense of our lives. Each chapter also, I mentioned I'm a yoga teacher, has a mindfulness or meditation aspect or a yoga sequence. And we have the most adorable art in this book.
From our friend and colleague, Jay Salvador Ramos, who does the Super Emo Buddies, or Super Emo Friends, I suppose, is their official title. But he's done a fabulous job with the illustrations.
Yeah. And what did I miss, Spock? I always miss something.
Okay, so two things that I would highlight would be that the idea of therapeutic fan fiction really is at the heart of this book. So it's using kind of the old stories and powers of myth to really take a look at our modern mythologies, which are steeped in, of course, superheroes and comics and manga and television series. So ways to look at those stories and then take the tools in those stories to help folks rewrite the parts of their lives that they feel like are not quite going as planned. And because we're both systemic thinkers, we really also wanted to help folks learn how to notice and then really analyze systemic problems so that they're able to separate themselves from things that are causing them strife without internalizing things that don't necessarily belong to them that are larger systemic issues. And fan fiction case studies. We have those in the book as well.
Can't forget the fan fiction case study.
Can't forget those.
So what are you talking about with something like fan fiction case studies? You're studying people's fan fiction to see what's wrong with them?
That's a great question. No, in fact, what we're doing is this is where we take back on our personae as Kirk and Spock. And so in the fan fiction case studies, each of the chapters is looking at a particular tool and technique. And then in the case studies, we show how you might use them in therapy. And we do that by writing in first person as our therapeutic selves. So it's as if you were doing a therapy session with Kirk and Spock, but then we select a character from fandom. So when looking at a tool like, say, post-traumatic growth, in chapter 4, we're looking at that with, actually, why am I blanking on this? Right. We're looking at this with Storm from the X-Men. And actually doing in the fanfic case study, doing a therapy session with Storm, and then talking with her how she would use the tool of post-traumatic growth in her life.
Janina, you've been rather fond of Storm in your own personal history. For those who, I guess, have never seen an interview with you, what's your connection with Storm?
Storm is my favorite superhero of all time. I feel like she saved my life. Like some other superheroes out there, whether it's Spider-Man or the Hulk or Wolverine, I also was exposed to radiation, but I'm still waiting on my spidey senses and my super strength, But the way that, in my case, it was Chernobyl radiation, the way that affected me is that whenever the weather changes, I get very, very ill. I go through severe migraines, sometimes seizures, and my body kind of shuts down. And so for the longest time, I felt controlled by the weather. But seeing Storm, in my case, it was first in the very first X-Men movie in 2000, and it just changed my life. Seeing her on the screen made me rethink my own perspective from a victim to a survivor, and I got into comics and, of course, reading her own origin story in terms of surviving that terrible plane crash where a plane crashed into her family home, killing her parents, leading Storm to not only have trauma reactions but also suffer from severe claustrophobia when she's an adult. Really shows a lot about how resilient she is, and over the course of the series, in the comic books, of course, we learned that she has actively worked on her anxiety so that the box doesn't hold her anymore. And so it's something that I've used with a lot of my clients who struggle with some kind of a specific phobia, even if it's not claustrophobia, but maybe a fear of driving or fear of flying, for example, where Storm becomes their hero also. So it's a really powerful example, and Storm is someone that I always look up to.
So all of you're using fictional characters to address people's real problems. Now, there are going to be people out there who are skeptical about this entire concept. I say somebody who has written and edited books on the psychology of fictional characters, 13 books. So I'm playing devil's advocate. Shouldn't you be talking about real people? What's up with this fictional character stuff, you people?
My first experience incorporating fiction into therapy settings started when I was working in a military setting. So I was working on a Marine base, working with active duty Marines who had just come back from Afghanistan or Iraq. Now you try asking somebody who just witnessed anywhere between 4 to 24 people being killed right in front of them and blaming themselves for what happened. You try asking someone like that how they felt about this event, and there's no word in the English language or any language to describe the horror of that experience, to describe the devastation of that loss. But using metaphor, a lot of the Marines that I was working with had an easier time relaying to me what they were going through. So when I would ask for an emotion, they would use a metaphor. They would say, you know how Bruce Wayne felt when his parents were killed in front of him? Or they would say, you know how Rick felt when he woke up in a hospital and he realized that there was a zombie apocalypse? They would use these really powerful examples to describe the terror and the trauma that they went through, and it made sense to them and it made sense to me. And in speaking about these examples, it offered these trauma survivors a language and a bridge to understand not only their experiences, but also to understand that there is nothing wrong with developing a mental health disorder after going through a traumatic experience, to take the stigma out of this really significant pain, and also to discover a road to recovery through the lens of their connection with their favorite character.
Do you have your readers do? They talked about using fan fiction. What kind of exercises do you have your readers do, Janina?
Yeah, so for some of my readers, I do an exercise within fan fiction. It's called self-insertion. And that's where readers will write about maybe a particular scene that within particular fandom might have been really traumatic, maybe when their favorite character died or when somebody was bullied and abused, a scene that they feel very strongly about. And then they will insert themselves into that scene and either replacing a character or most often being a part of the scene as an additional character and talk about how they would want to change the scene. So in many cases, they would save a character's life. They would stand up to the bully. And then we talk about the way that this particular action is meaningful for that individual. Because for many people, they might feel oppressed and silenced in real life, maybe through trauma that they've experienced or through some of the oppression that they're facing now. And through some of these fan fiction exercises, a lot of the folks that I worked with are essentially doing a mental rehearsal as a way of practicing channeling that empowerment through the lens of being a hero, just like their favorite superheroes. They later are able to carry out some of these skills outside of the fan fiction and the therapy setting and actually apply them to real life.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Janina, I loved the way that you talked about how you use this with adults and with veterans. And it sort of, my sort of way into using fan fiction and stories with folks started with kids and with teenagers. And I know that that's a group that you work with as well. And so I'm sure that you know, and you really resonate with the reality, which is that especially when you first get a teenager in your office, most of the time they're not going to be quick to talk to you about much. And they certainly don't want to open up and talk to you about their problems or school or parents. And so one of the easiest ways as a way in is often to get curious with kids and teenagers about what are their fandoms that resonate with them, what are the stories, what are the characters that really connect with them. And one of the more meaningful experiences that I had really early on in my career was I was working with someone and we were trying to talk about meditation. They had come from a really strong kind of DBT background, and I have some experience there, not as much as I do with narrative therapy. And so we were talking about different ways to meditate, and we went back and forth a bit. And I thought, well, what about just daydreaming? Do you ever just daydream? And they got really quiet. And inside my head, I was like, oh no, did I go the wrong direction here? But I used that therapeutic silence. I took a deep breath, I waited out, and then they said, well, sometimes I just imagine Game of Thrones. And I was like, oh, are you a fan? And they were like, yes, but I just imagine myself as a character, and I know that's really weird, but sometimes I spend a lot of time doing it, and I really shouldn't. I should be doing this. And I was like, no, that's great. Tell me all about it. And we didn't end up going with Game of Thrones. We actually used another X-Men character. We ended up using Jean Grey, also known as the Phoenix, as a way to really personify and also externalize one of their struggles with anxiety. And it just became this sort of like beautiful, really helpful way for them to connect with the heroic aspect of Jean Grey while also understanding how they were connected to anxiety, which was for them aka the Dark Phoenix, but also then to see the ways that they were different. And so that's kind of, at least for me in many of the ways, like that was how therapeutic fan fiction was sort of started to get born. Kind of...
And I think this kind of highlights, Travis, back to your question, like why not real people? We don't all know the same real people, right? But the X-Men's kind of a universal language for folks who know X-Men. Well, and for me, I mean, my practice is called Blue Box Counseling, which is a nod to the TARDIS. And I specialize in working with geeks, nerds, punks, LGBTQIA folks, secular folks, anyone who's felt unwelcome in a traditional wellness environment has a place in the Blue Box. And so for those folks, like this is universal language. Even if we don't both know X-Men, like we'll find something we both know. You know, I had somebody in session one day was like, oh, you know, this character from Umbrella Academy, and I hadn't watched Umbrella Academy yet. They're like, you know, they're kind of self-medicating because their experience is so difficult as a magician. And I was like, oh, sort of like Penny in The Magicians. They're like, yeah, sort of like Penny. Like, great, we found some ground. But if somebody's talking about, you know, their Uncle Joe, I don't know anything about their Uncle Joe, but I might know something about my Uncle Wolverine.
I didn't know where you were going there for a second, Justine, but I'm glad that you went with Uncle Wolverine.
Well, we were just such in an X-Men place, so I stayed there.
They're the client referring to Umbrella Academy. Makes me think one of the strengths of these things you're talking about is that you're showing interest in what interests them. You're not just giving them homework. Here, go check out this thing that's interesting to me. It's one thing that struck me about a lot of people who use bibliotherapy. And this is a variation of that. And bibliotherapy has very mixed results, but some of it is poorly researched. And a lot of it is somebody will assign a book. That's the biblio and bibliotherapy for those of you out there who don't know what I'm referring to. They'll assign this book. Well, a whole book is a lot to assign to a client. Any therapist knows you're going to have trouble getting clients to do their homework in the first place. A short story, okay, that's better. A comic book or an episode of a TV show, you're getting into bite-sized amounts they can digest if you're assigning these things. But what the examples you've been using, you're finding the things that already interest them, and that does a couple of different things. You're taking an interest in their interest, therefore you're taking an interest in them. You're showing an interest in them, a willingness to get invested in that side of their lives as opposed to talking at them. And that's one of the things that's always struck me about this. Janina has the anecdote that she has shared from a client whose interest was Veronica Mars, and Janina had not seen Veronica Mars, and then that weekend you became an expert in Veronica Mars. I don't think you necessarily have to go to that length, but just right there you were showing interest in what interested the client already in that side of their lives.
No, but that's such a great point, Travis. I often call it like clients giving me homework. When it's a fandom that I don't know, and then I'm like, okay, I guess today I'm learning about Suits. Not what I expected to be learning about, but there it is.
That's a great show.
No, it is. I would never have learned about it were it not for like these incredible gifts that I think that clients can really bring to us when we open the door to fandom.
Yeah, I've been learning a lot about anime lately. But one of the kind of big points that I always want to drive home with therapists is that as therapists, if any of you out there is a provider, you don't have to be an expert in pop culture to incorporate pop culture into therapy. You don't have to go home and watch every episode of Suits or Magicians or whatever TV show your client is into. All you have to be is open-minded and curious. Your client is the expert. And so for me, in my therapy, I take the therapeutic stance of I am both my client's kind of like mentor, but also their sidekick. And this is their journey, and my job is to be their cheerleader. And so I might know therapy skills, but my client knows the fandom. So we're guiding each other and we're supporting each other. And so I think that a lot of clinicians might shy away from something they don't know, from, let's say, talking about video games or manga or Magic the Gathering, just because they don't know much about what these things are. But just by asking a question, allowing our clients to bring it in to teach us, I think it can make such a difference. And for any of you out there who are in therapy, if your therapist is willing to learn, I think it's always okay to ask, like, hey, can I show you a clip of this episode? Can I show you like a 2-minute video of me playing this video game just so that you understand what it's about? Because that can improve your therapeutic relationship.
I'm not a gamer. Like that's not my primary nerddom. And I mean, just because I'm open, I get a lot of gamers. I get a lot of folks who just, are outside whatever the mainstream is. And I have one client in particular who is like a very serious gamer, and every session, the last 10 minutes is him showing me a playthrough of something that he's playing, and he explains it to me. Could I then go on to explain what all that was? No, but but it's a great therapeutic bonding, and it allows that client to be the expert in something.
Yeah.
Where in therapy, lots of times folks feel like, I don't even, like, they feel like they're not the expert, even though we know they're the expert in their own lives. But, gives them the opportunity to really feel like the expert in something concrete and tangible.
Well, and I think whether we're talking about TV shows, video games, or, some kind of role-playing games, I think that there's so much we can extrapolate from that too, right? Like a video game that someone plays often has a really important function, whether it's that person is like a leader on some kind of a mission, or maybe they have friends, or they are able to reach certain goals, or they stand up to bullies, right? They stand up to big mean bosses in the game. I think all of it can be really meaningful in a lot of ways, very similar to fan fiction, as we were talking about, because it again shows maybe what's really meaningful for that individual. So we can take the skills that that person is already really good at in terms of playing video games, for example, and use it as their superpowers outside of the video game as well as in the video game.
It sounds like a wonderful way to open dialogue. Clients aren't necessarily the quickest to start conversation, I would imagine. Some probably talk your head off from the first moment, but there will be plenty of people who might be reluctant to talk at all, especially those who are there because they were encouraged by somebody else to go to therapy.
Yeah, or those that have been oppressed and pushed down most of their lives and told that, look on the bright side and, don't think about this and don't share your dirty laundry and you're weak for sharing this. So a lot of folks, unfortunately, who have been shamed in this kind of way really do have a hard time opening up.
Well, and one of the great ways to initiate those conversations, I mean, I'm looking behind, frankly, all of you. I'm the only one who doesn't have like really cool geek props at this point. But when clients come in and when you're displaying your fandom with artwork and toys and books and games, that in and of itself can be such a beautiful conversation starter. And then therapy can begin from a place that is both about healing and about play and about whimsy. And you're right, Travis, it does. It makes people who wouldn't necessarily walk right in and talk your ear off, they open up sometimes because they're like, who is that? Who is that Funko Pop behind you? Larisa, is that Buffy or is it someone else? When we talk about it.
So for all of you personally, I think it seems pretty clear that part of your interest in going to this in the first place is that you are fans, very strong fans of many things. What inspired you to incorporate this into therapeutic practice in the first place? Do you remember?
I do. Just very briefly, this happened with in both my yoga world and in my therapy world. Is that and yoga came before therapy, so I'll go with that one. I was teaching yoga, and it felt really inauthentic. It felt like I was parroting back what my teachers had said. And the feedback I kept getting was like, you're talking like a yoga teacher. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're supposed to do, right? Aren't I just mimicking you, yoga teacher? And what I discovered was, to be authentic to myself, I had to create a style of yoga that was authentic to me. And I created this thing called Yoga Quest, which is literally narrative yoga. So it's fandom yoga. And the same thing happened with therapy. The feedback I got was like, you're pretending to be a therapist. And I'm like, oh, well, if I'm going to be authentically a therapist, if I'm not just pretending, then what that means is I need to be me. This is me. A weirdo who has a baby Yoda on my desk.
This thing about fantasy, stuff that did not happen, enabling us to feel more true to ourselves.
Exactly, because I think, so often we're wearing these like I'm fine masks, right? We're pretending, and I think fiction allows us to tell the truth. And it allows us to open up about grief and loss and trauma and how we're not okay. And so I think that there is a permission within fiction to be authentic with ourselves, and that's what I think its true power is.
There has been a rise in interest in certain types of fiction throughout the lockdown period. Some of it having to do with things that are. It was funny. It's like this burst in viewing of pandemic stories, but early in the pandemic. And I've done interviews discussing why in the world that would happen. But then a lot of escapism. For some people, they say it's like they're rewatching things that gave them comfort. The familiar. For me, it's I'm watching TV shows I never watched before. I'm finding new movies. I'm finding shows that I did not watch the first time around. But for a lot of people, I hear them talking about doing rewatches of the things that give them comfort, and whether it's things that are somehow mentally exercising going through the crisis, such as watching that pandemic movie in which, whether it has a good happy ending or not, there's hope throughout the film. There's hope that they're going to overcome the crisis that's going on. Or you're watching some silly sitcom that is complete escapism. Escapism
No,
is one of
Justine.
the things people think is going on with interest in fantastic stories. Why are people interested in superheroes or any of these other things? Is it only about escapism? And yes, there can definitely be escapism, but that's not all there is to it. What else do you see going on in these?
Justine, can you tell the story of your client and Outer Wilds, the video game? I would tell it, but I will utterly weep. So it's best if I don't.
Yeah, it's so with everything that's been happening with the pandemic, it's shined a light on where we are, as a planet. And for some folks, they're starting to realize like, oh wow, the planet is really sick and things are really hard. And I had a client who sort of started to have this epiphany of, the planet will end, was sort of what happened. The planet will end. And I discovered that this client played a video game called Outer Wilds, which, if you aren't familiar, the premise is you literally die every 22 minutes. Like the world ends every 22 minutes. And so the purpose is what, as Gandalf said, what do we do with the time that is given to us? And so we talked about like, okay, so in Outer Wilds, you only have 22 minutes. What do you do? Do you run around like like a mad person, I then used since I hadn't played Outer Wilds, I only know it from Larisa telling me about it.
And
I was
talked about it a lot.
You have talked about it. So I have like a fairly good knowledge, but it's like, it makes me think of the Titanic. And if you know that the boat is going down, what are you going to do? Are you going to be in the band playing on the deck? Are you going to be helping people into boats? Are you going to be fighting for boats? What are you going to do with this time when you know it is limited? Because that's true for all of us. Our time is limited. And it made sense to that client, and we've been able to use Outer Wilds as this ongoing metaphor for when things get hard. Okay, well, what are you going to do with your 22 minutes? Or what are you going to do with this time? How are you going to make this time meaningful to you if it's all that you have? And yeah, that's a real tearjerker of an example. I'm surprised your brain went there, Larisa.
Well, I appreciate that you picked up the baton when I was like, I cannot carry this ring by myself. And you carried it, because I would have just utterly started weeping. So thank you.
What else do you want people to know about these books you have upcoming that you haven't mentioned?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention is in Super Survivors, there are kind of 6 characters. The book goes through almost like a group therapy setting, where these 6 heroes who have all been through something really challenging, and they're meeting on Zoom with the therapist to kind of talk about what they're going through. The 6th hero is the reader. And so the reader is a part of the support group. So you, as the reader, get to be a part of this group. The group interacts with you. They ask you questions and they invite you to answer, and they respond back to you. So it's meant to be inclusive. And so that 6th hero is you. They are your cultural background, your gender identity, your sexual orientation. They have your trauma story. They are who you are. And you are a part of this heroes group. The other 5, although technically fictional characters, there are parts of each of those characters that were donated by real life individuals. So like a firefighter who witnessed 9/11 and is now going through a lot of flashbacks and symptoms during the pandemic. A doctor who had seen a lot of patients die, a person that doesn't know anyone who died from COVID and is struggling with self-shame, agoraphobia, and OCD. And so what I wanted to do was to show the diversity of this disorder, and there are people from all different countries. And what I wanted to show too is that you, as the reader, are one of the heroes that are also going through this journey. And my hope is to take the stigma out of whatever your experience is with COVID. Even if you've never had COVID, even if you don't know anyone who's going through COVID, your feelings are allowed, your feelings are understandable and important. And I wanted to remind everyone out there that whatever your journey is, you are the hero of your journey.
As far as additional stuff about our book, I would just say it's funny. It's irreverent. I mean, it may be the silliest self-help book there is, which I know. Can self-help be funny? Yeah, it can. Because here's the thing. Any therapist will tell you there's a lot of laughter in the therapy room. Mm-hmm. And so we've, without making light of what we're talking about, we do imbue a lot of humor into this book so that, folks want to read it and want to continue through it to find their own healing.
The only other piece that I would add is that we really tried to be mindful when crafting this book to talk about kind of the different modalities that we were pulling from. So really kind of tipping our hat to Jungian archetypes and Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, that I think does a really nice job, that helped us really expand fandom and the healing journey in the therapy room. And we also gave props, and I want to give props right now to you, Janina, and you, Travis, because I mean, you both have been pioneers in this field. We wouldn't be where we are today in our own careers or with this book if it weren't for the fabulous work that both of you have done. So we have so much gratitude for both of you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Thank you, and I can't wait to see this book. I've been talking about fan fiction forever, and I've been wanting to have some kind of a resource to recommend to other providers and also to clients, so I'm really, really excited about it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And of course, I mean, I try to create opportunities for other people along the way. I think that's important. As you know, I will often say, it's like, what are you saying now that you didn't say last time? What are you bringing in, whether it's a challenge to yourself or just something for variety to your readers? Janina, in her books, her previous ones, she's had several self-help books, help books on Harry Potter and female characters, supernatural, and even aside from the topic themselves, it's like, what are you bringing each time you do this? Because you will have some people who read everything you've ever written, and you want to make sure they're getting something new out of it. Now, with these that you have coming up, like Janina, this one is specifically focused on trauma and survivors. And while those are in all the stories you're talking about, it does sound like you're hitting a little closer to real life with this topic than you have a lot in the past.
Yes, that's correct.
So I hope the readers find your works interesting and entertaining and maybe helpful and insightful. And I thank you all for joining me here. And so tell viewers where they can find you online, social media, where they can get your books. Obviously, the word Amazon comes up pretty easily. Where are you out there in the world?
You can find me at my website, blueboxcounseling.com, or on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Mind Body Fandom, because I take a holistic approach to healing mind, body, and fandom.
Very nice. On Twitter, I am Shadow Quill like a feather, and on Instagram, I am Dr. Janina Scarlet Official.
On Twitter, I am at Spock's All Ears, and if you follow me, you're gonna see me as I'm playing through Dragon Age. So if you're looking for my hot takes on the Dragon Age video game series, at Spock's All Ears is where you want to be. And then with Instagram, you'll find me on our podcast, which is Justine at Starship
_Therapise. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful.
Well, I am, Dr. Travis Langley at Superheroologist on Twitter. Just look for Travis Langley. I'm almost certainly the one you're going to find anywhere out there. Thank you all. I need to make up a wonderful sign out. All right, well, bye.
Thank you so much for having us, Travis.
Yes,
Yeah, that was so fun. It was so good to see you both.
Really
Good to see all of you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, stop.